Since 2014, we've had a college football playoff, and most college football fans agree that it's time for a change, and many believe that we should move to 8 instead of 4 teams. I personally want to give my stance on the playoff format, and with that, I'm going to use it to create 8-team playoff brackets for every year of the college football playoff era, and I'm going to try to predict who I think would have made and won each game. If you like videos like this, or just college football in general, you will regret not subscribing to the channel, as I have a ton of cool stuff planned for the future, and you won't want to miss out on any of it. Be sure to take a moment and hit that like button as well, drop a video suggestion in the comment section, and turn on post notifications so you never miss another video. Okay, so as we know, in 2014, the 1 seed was Alabama, the 2 seed was Oregon, the 3 seed was Florida State, and the 4 seed was Ohio State. From there, the highest ranked group of 5 team was number 20 Boise State, and they were from the Mountain West Conference. This year's group of 5 was particularly weak, but the Broncos still won 11-2, and we will give them the 8 seed. Now we look at the final remaining teams. TCU won 11-1 and would have gotten a spot as the 6th seed. The 7th seed is where it gets a bit more difficult. Both Mississippi State and Michigan State went 10-2 that year, and both conferences were difficult. At one point, that Mississippi State team was ranked number 1 in the country, so for the last spot, I think the committee would have chosen the Bulldogs. Plus, they would have likely favored the SEC over the Big Ten. Alabama would have destroyed Boise State in the first round. I think that Oregon versus Mississippi State would have actually been really close, but based on how Oregon ended up playing in the Rose Bowl, I think they would have won that game in a close game. In the Florida State versus TCU matchup, I would have honestly picked TCU. That Florida State team was overrated all year, and I think the Horned Frogs would have pulled off the upset. Finally, that Ohio State team really turned it on in the playoff that year, and I think they would have beat Baylor pretty easily. So now it would have been Alabama versus Ohio State, and TCU versus Oregon. Due to Blake Sims not being elite, and Ohio State having the X factor in Ezekiel Elliott, I personally think the Buckeyes would have won in a close game. I think TCU and Oregon would have also been close, and Marcus Mariota versus Trevon Boykin would have been a QB battle for the ages. Believe it or not, I really do think that TCU would have won that game though, so it would have ended up being an Ohio State versus TCU championship game. Clearly the Buckeyes were the best team in college football in 2014, so I think they would have taken care of the Horned Frogs. In 2015, the number 1 seed was Clemson, the number 2 seed was Alabama, the number 3 seed was Michigan State, and the 4 seed was Oklahoma. The winner of the Pac-12 was Stanford, and they would have gotten the 6th seed. The best group of 5 school was Houston, who ended up going 12-1 that year. The 2 wildcard spots would have gone to Iowa, who went 12-1, and Ohio State, who also went 11-1. This would have been a really good year for the Big Ten, and the first matchup would have been the 1 seed Clemson versus the 8 seed Houston. The Cougars actually beat 4 ranked opponents in 2015, so I think it would have been closer than many people would think, but I think Clemson gets the job done. The next matchup would have been the 2 seed versus the 7 seed Iowa. In my opinion, Iowa was a serious pretender in 2015, so Alabama would have won this game pretty easily. Next, it would have been number 3 Michigan State versus number 6 Stanford, and I would have gone with Stanford. The Spartans were good, but not amazing, and Christian McCaffrey would have been too much for them. Finally, it would have been number 4 Oklahoma versus number 5 Ohio State. This would have been a really good game, but I would have gone with Ohio State because they're a more clutch team than Oklahoma. So now it would have been number 1 Clemson versus number 5 Ohio State, and number 2 Alabama versus number 6 Stanford. I think Clemson would have beaten Ohio State, and Alabama would have beaten Stanford. I think it would have been a thriller. I can't argue with history, so I'm going to stick with Alabama winning that game over Clemson. The 2016 playoff was going to be a little different, as Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and Washington were the original selections. 10-2 Oklahoma would have been the 5 seed, and I would have given the undefeated Western Michigan Broncos the 8 seed. The wildcard selection would have been weaker, as the Big Ten would have sent the 10-2 Michigan Wolverines and the 11-2 Penn State Nittany Lions. Alabama versus Western Michigan would have been pretty interesting, and I honestly think it would have been a game. Alabama wins that game though, and then Clemson would have beaten Michigan in a game that I also think could have been close. Ohio State played the 6th seed Oklahoma, and based on how the Buckeyes played against Clemson, I actually think that Oklahoma would have won that game. The final matchup would have been Washington versus Penn State. That Penn State team was dominant at times, but they also struggled in some of their bigger games. My gut tells me that Penn State played better competition and would have shown up and beat Washington. So now it would be Alabama versus Penn State, and Clemson versus Oklahoma. I really like that Penn State team, and I think they would have beaten the Crimson Tide to advance to the national championship. Clemson would have likely beaten Oklahoma pretty badly, but maybe Baker Mayfield would have changed things up a bit and gave it a game. Clemson would have taken care of Penn State in the national championship, and we wouldn't have had Hunter Renfrow's memorable game-winning touchdown. It's super controversial to pick Penn State, because they easily could have flopped in their first round game, but that team had the potential to win it all that year. 2017 would have been really interesting as Clemson, Oklahoma, Georgia, and Alabama would have been joined by an Ohio State team from the Big Ten and USC from the Pac-12. The best group of 5 school was the undefeated UCF Knights, and the best team left was a 12-1 Wisconsin team. In my opinion, number 1 Clemson would have been the first 1 seed to get upset, and UCF would have won that game. The Tigers didn't show up to begin with, the Knights had a ton of momentum that year, and Kelly Bryant was nowhere near an elite quarterback. Number 2 Oklahoma would have played number 7 Wisconsin. The Badgers had a pretty easy schedule in 2017, but Jonathan Taylor would have made the game close, and I also think Baker Mayfield would not have lost that game. Number 3 Georgia would have played number 6 USC, and despite the Sam Darnold hype, I would have taken Georgia. Finally, number 4 Alabama would have played number 5 Ohio State. I think it would have been a close game. That Ohio State team was nothing special, and Jalen Hurts had been struggling. I would have picked the Tide though, and the first matchup would have been number 8 UCF versus number 4 Alabama. My gut tells me that Alabama wins that game, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say UCF wins it because I think Hurts would have struggled in that game, and UCF would have had all the momentum and hype in the world. Oklahoma and Georgia would have been a classic like it was, and I'm not going to rewrite history, and I'm going to stick with the dogs. So it would have been a number 3 Georgia versus the number 8 UCF Knights in the national title game. I think that Georgia is the more talented team, and they were the better team in that year, and they would have won that game, but I think it would have been closer than many people would have thought. In 2018, it would have been Clemson, Alabama, Notre Dame, and Oklahoma, joined by Ohio State from the Big Ten and Washington from the Pac-12. UCF would have gotten back to the playoff, and the final wild card would have been Georgia. The first game would have been number 1 Clemson versus number 8 UCF, and I think Clemson would have killed them. The next game would have been number 2 Alabama versus number 7 Washington. This game would have also been a blowout in the Tide's favor. Things get interesting as number 3 Notre Dame would have played against number 6 Ohio State. Notre Dame never seemed amazing that year, but Ohio State did have that weird loss to Purdue. I would have gone with the Buckeyes behind the arm of Haskins though, so finally it would have been number 4 Oklahoma versus number 5 Georgia. Kyler Murray is just a better quarterback than Jake Fromm, and Oklahoma would have won that game. So now it would have been number 1 Clemson versus number 4 Oklahoma, and just like it played out, Clemson would have won big. Number 2 Alabama versus number 6 Ohio State would have been an exciting game, and I'm honestly going to go with number 6 Ohio State. Dwayne Haskins versus Trevor Lawrence would have been a really fun matchup, but that Clemson team just had the it factor, and they would have won pretty easily. Finally, we are going to choose the bracket for 2019. Besides LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, and Oklahoma, the Pac-12 would have sent Oregon as the 5 seed, and 12-1 Memphis would have been the 8 seed. The 2 wild cards would have been Georgia and Baylor. Number 1 LSU would have destroyed number 8 Memphis in the first round, and number 2 Ohio State would have won a blowout game versus number 7 Georgia. Number 3 Clemson versus number 6 Baylor would have been a close game in my opinion, but Trevor would have won the game. Number 4 Oklahoma would have lost to number 5 Oregon. I think Herbert and the Ducks would have won comfortably. Number 1 LSU would have beaten number 5 Oregon comfortably in the next round, and number 2 Ohio State would have lost a close game against number 3 Clemson. We aren't going to rewrite history in that game, so that's how that's going to go. Clemson and LSU would have been in the title, and just like it actually happened, Joe Burrow would have led them to the win. Overall, I really enjoyed making today's video, and I hope you guys thought it was fun. Feel free to debate me in the comment section down below, and let me know what games you think I picked right, and what games I was totally dumb on. Also, let me know what your opinion on the current college football playoff format is, and who you think will make it in 2020. If you like the concept of today's video, be sure to let me know by hitting that like button. I didn't really have a topic in mind for today, so I decided I was going to try something new, and I hope you guys actually liked it. If you are new to the channel though, please be sure to subscribe and help me reach 2.5k subscribers by the end of June. Before you leave, make sure to check out these other videos I have chosen for you guys to watch next, and until next time, peace.